What if I told you the Florida State University shooting wasn't random? What if it was calculated, timed, targeted, and enabled by a society that keeps pretending that it doesn't see the red flags? Well, welcome to America, where we give killers the roadmap and then act shocked when they follow it.
Two brothers, sons of a Navy SEAL. Jerome Hill, a former Baltimore PD officer and narcotics detective. Victor Hill, the former sheriff of Clayton County and author of Vigilante Sheriff. Now, they've joined forces to break down the hottest topics in law enforcement and beyond on the Hill of Justice.
Keith, it's crazy. I'm here with retired Sheriff Victor Hill. Obviously, we're your hosts of Hill of Justice, but we have another tragedy on our campuses, universities, elementary schools, and this one is deadly once again. So just to give you a little bit of context, on April 17th, we had allegedly this guy named Phoenix Eichner. He was the FSU, identified as the FSU mass shooter. 20 years old, he had a political science student. He walks onto campus with a loaded handgun and opens fire in front of the student union at FSU. Two innocent lives, Robert Morales and Tyru Chaba, were taken from us. 6 others were injured, including him. He gets shot in the jaw, and he's still in the hospital right now. Once again, chaos follows. Students running all over the place, classrooms locked down, sirens wailing. I mean, we're right back where we're at again. So I want to go ahead and have you take a look at this next clip from CBS.
We're learning new details about the suspect accused of carrying out a deadly mass shooting at Florida State University Thursday. Tallahassee police say there was no connection between 20-year-old Phoenix Eichner and the victims. He was shot by police and injured in the shooting and will have to spend a significant amount of time in the hospital. Officials say he will then be transferred to a detention center and face charges up to and including first-degree murder. 2 people were killed in Thursday's shooting on campus, which remained closed Friday. 5 were also injured and being treated at a local hospital.
We're at this again. Your thoughts?
Well, let me say this, brother. At some point, we as a society in the United States of America has got to make the decision. We want freedom, but we also want security. And there's a balance there. And it's one of the rare instances where you can't have your cake and eat it too. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Number one, we've got to control the ingress and egress from places. That's the only way to make sure nobody can get in there without a weapon. But people don't like that, especially people who work there. And I was sheriff, it's always the judges, the attorneys. Well, why I have to take my keys out, why I have to do this and do that. But the only way for us to make absolutely sure that no one's getting a gun into the courtroom is to search everyone. And now, in order to keep our campuses safe, that's a necessary evil. It's an inconvenience. It gets political. Well, I shouldn't have to be searched because I'm the professor or whatever. That's how I controlled drugs at my jail. Everyone had to be searched going into the jail, including me. There was only one way in and one way out. And to take the politics out, they had to search me and make sure they searched me well. And I had a camera where I could watch it. That's one thing. The other thing that we have to do, and nobody likes this either, but usually before these happen, there's what we refer to as pre-attack indicators. Most people don't become active shooters and don't leave a clue that that's about to do. If you look at it, the majority of them, 90%, left something on a social media, wrote some type of crazy letter to someone, was speaking to someone and saying things like, I think people should die or whatever. And then people just put it off as, well, he's just crazy. Well, law enforcement has to be aggressive about that. I've had situations like that. We had a guy in my county that was a lunatic. He's still around. He still goes to commission meetings. He was running in and out of city council meeting. And, when he started saying certain things, I sent the SWAT team to go see him. And they ask us, look, do you have any weapons? Do you mind if we look? Is there something going on? Look, based on things you're saying, we're going to have to keep an eye on you because you're saying things that fits the profile that you may one day hurt people. And and I believe that stopped them. I know the mayor of that city, Jonesboro, the former mayor, she was terrified, but we took action. We just didn't say, well, he's crazy. Just don't pay him any attention or whatever. But that's the type of aggressive, preemptive police work that has to be done to prevent this stuff. And of course, we all know, from your history and our history, we have prosecutors out of there that will prosecute us for doing preemptive things. We've experienced that. But hopefully at some point they'll see, I especially hope they'll see and all the people who've died as a result of not doing that,
Well, we have those indicators, at least with this case, he didn't steal the weapon off the street. He got it right from home. A law enforcement household on top of that, where his
Right.
stepmother is a deputy sheriff for Leon County Sheriff's Office. You add to that mix, you have a political student organizations that have complained about his ideological extremism. And all of this was hiding in plain sight, and the statistics bear 60% of the school shooters get guns from family.
Yes.
60%.
Yes.
1 in 3 mass shooters show behavioral warning signs. States with weaker gun laws see more school shootings. These are known facts. And we're back here again. The students who knew Eichner said he pushed all these extreme ideas in student clubs, these racial jokes, these white nationalist dog whistles, the thinly veiled hate speech. No one stopped him. Not one person got him flagged.
Again, law enforcement is going to have to get more aggressive. People are going to have to be more aggressive about reporting this stuff. And then you got to understand there's a lot of times people report this and law enforcement still don't do anything. So you have people that will report it and they'll say, hey, look, something looks kind of suspicious. Well, it's really nothing we can do about that. Now, there's something you can do. You could at least talk to the person. Even if the person doesn't give you consent to search or whatever, just the fact that you knock on their door and say, hey, listen, we're getting complaints. We're concerned you might hurt somebody. Do you have any weapons? Do you have access to it? Do you mind if we look? We're going to have to keep an eye on you. And we really need to keep an eye on them. But that type of police work is almost non-existent now. And a lot of it is out of fear of being politically correct. People saying, well, it's police harassment. It's a police state. Let me tell you this, man. I'm more interested in being secure than I am in officer friendly. If I had children, be it elementary school children or college kids, I could care less if they like the cops there. I could care less if the cops dance with them or rap with them. I want to know that the cops at that school are so good at what they do, so proficient with their weapons, so no nonsense, that if something like that happens, I know this guy is going to be neutralized and neutralized quickly. And I would prefer everyone's afraid of him because maybe this guy will be like, well, I don't want to go to that school because I know these people will take me out. That's what I care about. I would want my child to come home safe. I could care less if this guy is officer friendly and he holds hands and cry with them. We got to make this distinction. Do we want to be protected or do we want officers to line dance with us? Anyone can line dance, but if you line dancing with me, how can you see the active shooter coming to the school? I need that sheepdog watching the crowd and watching what's around the crowd to make sure if my kids are line dancing, if that's what they want to do, they can do it safely without being shot. But the priorities have gotten mixed up of what the police is actually there for. I'm not saying they got to go around and mean mug everybody and be mean to everybody, but there has to be that level there, or you don't have the protection you need.
Let's take a look at this second video. I want you to take a look at this clip.
Jillian, your reaction to learning the suspect is the son of law enforcement and apparently had access to her weapon, according to the local officials.
I will say, in all honesty, I'm very shocked and surprised and upset by it. But what I think we need to recognize is that this was a motivated offender. So regardless of who he knew or who his family was, this was someone who had planned something and who wanted to carry it out. So All of that is going to unfold in the coming days. I'm sure we're going to learn more. As Marissa said, people have been discussing his ideology, clubs he went to. The sheriff's office had talked about him being part of the youth advisory. That is all secondary and supplemental to understanding his, in fact, motivation for this.
Yeah, so that detail did strike me as well. That a fellow student told NBC News the suspect had espoused white supremacist views in a political discussion group. Is that something that would have put him on the radar of law enforcement at some point?
Keith, I got to say this.
Uh-huh.
You know, the other insidious part of this whole situation is that he's a white male and he's espousing all types of ideology. I do not agree with the former NYPD officer there. I don't believe that's secondary, and it should never be secondary. Let me give you a thought experiment. What if he had posted ISIS propaganda? The FBI would have been at his door. But because he posted white supremacist memes, we want to call it free speech. And this is the problem, that we have homegrown terrorists, white supremacists running around here, and they fall under the umbrella of mental health. Oh, guess what? He just had problems at home. There had to be some other issue. He's not a monster. It's the system that failed him. And then what do we have? This.
Again, and let me tell you this. Again, it's about the leadership in law enforcement, to be honest with you. Okay. Again, the leadership is very gun shy now. When I was sheriff, I actually had a social media guy, and he would look across social media just to see if there were any young people brandishing weapons. Every now and then you get these kids that get on social media and they start brandishing all these submachine guns, assault rifles, and everything. Okay, well, that deserves a visit.
Absolutely.
Hey, we saw these pictures. Hey, are these guns real? Oh, no, they play guns. Well, can we see them? They're not stolen, are they? But just the fact that even if they say, well, you can't come in, you can't look, they know. Mm-hmm. We know.
Right.
And that's a good time to pay some overtime and have a car sit outside that house for a few days to make absolutely sure. But see, that type of basic common sense law enforcement is gone. Also, you got to think about this, okay? I'm not going to criticize this deputy for not locking the gun in the safe. I mean, you and I were both street cops. We kept our guns where we could get to it if we needed to quickly. And any people in the house were trained to stay away from that. I know you trained my niece and nephew to that. So, but I will say this. If you know that you got kids, be it blood or step kids or cousins or anybody around that hey, you should be a street cop long enough to know, hey, something ain't quite right. When this person is around, my gun either needs to be on me or it needs to be secured. I don't want this person having access. And, everybody who wears a gun and badge is not actually what we call the real police. But if you are, you should be able to sense that, even if it's in your family or not. We all have people in our family. You and I, we have cousins that are outlaws. And every family is going to have someone that may show some level of mental health. I mean, that's in every family. That's just in the world. And you got to know, okay, well, who's in my house today? Well, I don't need my weapon out around there. Like, it's either got to be on me so I can have access to it, or it's going to have to be locked up. So the only thing I would question is, I'm sure that she probably knew enough about him to know, hey, this guy needs help, and until we can get him help, if my spouse is not willing to get him help, we need to keep things away from him where he could be a problem.
Yeah, I think that, sometimes you could be too close to the problem. And
Right.
That is what it seems to be. And moreover, the college campuses and the students have some skin in this. They got to start tracking, ideological extremism before it becomes terrorism. Somebody, when they heard that stuff, could have said something. And let's be clear, mental illness all by itself doesn't cause mass shootings, but the trauma does. the untreated pain, the isolation, they set the stage for this type of nonsense to happen. And he had a history.
That's
He had
right.
an identity crisis. Apparently he was one name and then he had to be another. There was some disconnection from his mother, some alleged abuse on top of it. And then add on to it the rumors that he was very calculating in what he did, allegedly. Apparently on this particular day, you had law enforcement being trained on one side of the city, and he targeted this attack at that particular time. And
Mm-hmm.
why not at that particular time? When it's lunchtime, student union, people coming out. So we're talking about a mass casualty event that could have been far worse than what happened. And these were signs, and nobody acted. We don't need metal detectors as much as we need trauma detectors at this point, and people who train to act when they go off like that. And so campus counselors, I know they're underpaid. I know intervention teams are overwhelmed and underfunded, but there's warning signs that are getting louder and louder and louder, and we're not seeing this.
I agree. I'm not going to sit here and say that I know a lot about counseling. I don't even know if I could tell you counseling would help, but I know how law enforcement can help.
Mm.
We work the streets long enough, we're exposed long enough, and have enough training to know when something's not right with a person.
Right.
And there are things that should be done that'll stop things from happening. Uh, the preemptive use of restraints. We see now what's happening in my county when preemptive restraints aren't used. There are 5 people dead. There's all kind of assaults and stuff. There's things that people are afraid to do because if they do it, it's not politically correct, even though we're trained to do it, even though policy says we can do it. And because of stuff like that, law enforcement is reluctant. Because at the end of the day, violent people, there has to be, you have to control them. And the only way you can control them is to restrict their movement by detention or confinement or restraints until those counselors can come in and do what they do. And I don't even know 100% if they can cure that. It's like child molesters. There's no known cure for child molesters. The only thing we can do is lock them away from kids to make sure they can't do it again. I don't know if a counselor that, okay, he's good now, you can leave your kids alone with him.
Sure, right.
And of course that's probably
Yeah.
true with a lot of folks like this. There has to be some type of level of restraints and make sure they don't have access to weapons, make sure they're watched, make sure if they're at certain places that they're checked. But again, people come into, well, you can't do that. You're infringing on rights. Well, what's more important? We got to keep people alive. And, that unfortunately, that's what it is. To make a place safe, you got to search everyone coming in the place. You can't say, well, we're going to search you and don't search the other person. But the people who feel like, hey, I shouldn't be searched because I'm above reproach, they make it difficult for us to give the type of security and safety that people actually need.
Yeah, I agree with you on that because, until we start treating hate speech like a fire alarm and guns access like a privilege instead of a right, we'll keep burying our children and we'll keep on burying them over and over again. And I know this isn't the last of it. We're just going to keep on going year after year after year. And offering thoughts and prayers instead of policies and prevention is where we are in the midst of right now. You're right, 100%. When you ignore that we would rather go ahead and protect rights, then we're going to go ahead and lose lives, period.
Absolutely. And let me say this too. There are people who are talking about stricter gun laws or taking guns away. We're beyond that now. The cancer spread too far. If we were to actually take guns from people, the gun rights people do have a very good point with this. They say, okay, if you take the guns away, then only the bad guys will have it and the good guys won't. Now, they got a legitimate point there, because if they actually came up with a law where no one can have a gun but the police, then all of the law-abiding people like us, we're going to give up our guns because we have to, even though we don't agree with it. But the criminals are going to continue to get guns on the black market. So now,
For sure.
exactly. So that's a legitimate point. So it's a situation now that's far gone. You go to countries like Japan where no one can have a gun but the police, and the crime is almost zero. It is very, very safe. But now there's so many guns out now, and now it's such an issue with the right to bear arms. That is far gone. That's in stage 4 cancer. There's nothing we can do about that. What we've got to do is the law enforcement has to be given the authority and the confidence to be more aggressive about what it takes to prevent this stuff. And that's going to mean going and pay these people a visit. It's going to mean more searches at places. It's going to mean a whole lot of stuff that's going to inconvenience people. But that's where we're at now.
Yeah, well, I mean, we may be at that. I agree with you that at this point in time, there's too many guns out that there would be no point, or we can find ourselves in a very, very detrimental point in the United States where we are actually going ham and fighting good folks
Yes.
who are doing the right things, right? Um, and I'm glad we're talking about the gun rights of individuals. Certainly, I'm definitely in for small arms, people being armed with small arms. I've always had a debate with people with AR-15s, 47s. I mean, we can go down the list over and over of the high-powered rifles that exist out there. We can't confiscate them too at this point in time, but
It's too late.
That time is gone. It's like the event horizon. Once you go into the black hole, it's over.
Yes.
But we can hold people super accountable, and it's about what we talked about on our previous show, that we are going to have to get to the point as citizens and is to say, hey, guess what? If this was committed with this means that. That means your life is taken. It's taken quickly, and it's not about a whodunit, but we're going to take your life quickly, and there's not going to be anything buts about it that anybody else can do. Especially if we got superior evidence that you did this and you took out this many people. That's a 30-day. See ya. You're out of here. And then we're going to have to go ahead and think about, how are we going to go ahead and punish those individuals who are careless and reckless and leaving their weapons unsecured, able to go ahead and, I don't know the answer to that, but the fact of the matter is there's got to be some heavy, heavy punishment so we could stop individuals and just willy-nilly just taking their guns and just leaving it on the sofa. They're going somewhere, or putting it in their diaper bag, and then their child gets in and shoots and blasts their heads off. We got those issues too.
I know, and that's a hard one, brother, because kind of like, okay, here in my county, the Atlanta airport is there, and before I left being sheriff, maybe 4 or 5 people a week would come to jail because they left a gun in a bag and they were going through, and then they get arrested and they weren't. The sad part about this is this: they weren't actually trying to get a gun on a plane to do anything. They forgot. I mean, it's very, very obvious, because you pretty much know you're not going to get a gun in a small carry-on bag onto a plane anyway. And so they're being criminalized for making that mistake. Totally different. They weren't trying to get on there and run into the World Trade Building. And there's things kind of like car accidents and stuff like that. There are times where there's certain mistakes that are made, and that's not the intent. And how about all the people who leave their guns in their cars? Most of the criminals in Clayton County and all throughout the nation, they get their guns by breaking into cars. And half of the time, they don't have to break into cars. People leave them unlocked, and they go in and they look under the seat of the glove compartment. There's a gun. With the key fobs now, the main thing is to find a car unlocked that they left the key fob in. So imagine, now don't get me wrong, there needs to be more responsibility, because you're putting guns out into the street unintentionally. And I would put out notices to citizens and say, look, you've got to keep your car locked. You've got to kick your gun out the car. But imagine that one day that your gun is in the glove compartment and you get out and that person steals that gun and they go and do something crazy like this, and now you're facing 30 or 40 years. I mean, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be something that happens. Maybe it should be probably more civil than criminal, but it can happen.
Yeah,
It can happen.
I can agree with that. And
Yeah.
but get back to the FSU shooting. You brought up an interesting point about checking everyone. But when you live in an open society, and particularly a university as large as FSU, and any university, quite truthfully, you can't do that. You can't check everybody. I mean, maybe going into the student hall, but not on the grounds. Anybody's walking in and out off of those grounds, and do. So what do you do then?
It's almost getting to the point now where we're going to have to rely on technology. They got technology out there now that you walk past something, if you got a cell phone on it, alerts you. I was actually looking at some technology that not only could it tell you if a person had drugs, but what kind of drugs it was on. It was like some type of drug detector. I mean, it's going to be very, very expensive, but what's more expensive, the lives or whatever? I mean, there may have to be certain things put out on the grounds. I'm just speculating on certain remedies perhaps that we could look at in the future. But people going inside certain buildings where there's large amounts of people, the only way to make sure it's safe is to clear everybody before they come in there. And the sad part about it is, if you really do it right, you're going to take people off, because that means you've got to close off every other exit. And there are people who just feel hey, I'm a cook, so I have the right to go in and out this way. Hey, if you're at a jail, well, I'm a nurse, I come in through this way. Well, hell, we found nurses bringing drugs into the jail. If they can bring drugs into the jail, they can bring a gun into the jail. So all of that had to be cornered off. It's inconvenient, but that's where we're at now. Because
Well,
the only other recommendation is if we take guns from everybody. We know that's not going to happen.
no, that's not going to happen.
And even if it did, to their point, they have a very good point. Then only the bad guys will have a gun, and that's even a worse situation.
And I'm interested in the psychology of how we went from a free society before 9/11, where we were able to get onto planes with minimum check. And after 9/11, everybody's very, very, very cooperative and want to go ahead and make sure that everybody's checked going onto the plane. And we had to go ahead and change as a society to do something like that. With all these children being killed, especially at these schools, um, I don't understand why we're not there yet on that end of it.
I don't know if we're ever going to get there. Let me tell you this. We're there after something happened. I just got to tell the truth about it. Like, we had a famous incident that happened here in Atlanta at the Fulton County Courthouse with Brian Nichols. Right after that happened, every courthouse in Georgia was probably the most secure courthouses in the world, because there was this awareness for everybody. But as a few years went by and it kind of got into the distant memory, I started seeing security lapse all over the place. And that's why I would constantly do these checks. I would try to break in my own security or send people, see if you can get this weapon through or whatever, because people get lax. Well, that's just something that happened 4 or 5 years ago. That's not going to happen again. And that's what happens. You notice even with 9/11 now, that's kind of gotten to the distant past. There's more people now complaining about getting checked or whatever like that. When it first happened, there's this alert. Yeah, check me. But once it goes on for a little while and it gets into the memory, it's almost like a cycle. It's like the pendulum going back and forth. And, and then the pendulum goes right back to complacency again. And when you get complacency and, oh, shucks, that's not going to happen, then we get this.
I agree with that. The only pushback I have on that is that these mass shootings are happening every day, it seems like. So,
but it's
why
not
it's
not a reality till it happens in your town, those people It's just something you see on TV. And it's something that we have to take serious and take it to the next level every day, everywhere.
Yeah, well, I hear what you're saying. I just know that those planes going down weren't in everybody's town either. So that's what bothers me about that whole situation.
I agree with you on that, brother. I do.
Yeah. Well, that's all we have for today. it's one of our most insidious parts of life in America that we're experiencing, and this is not going to end anytime soon. Hate to be somber about that, but this happens to be our new reality, and we got to think of some better way to go ahead and handle these matters. And right now, America has no answer at this point. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and thank everyone who are subscribing, liking, commenting on our show. We appreciate it. We're going to continue to keep on answering to everyone that we have that responds to us. But that's it for today's show. And I wanted to just say thank you to everyone. This is The Hill of Justice, produced by Jameen Delmas Studios, and we'll see you next time.